see the frame before we get started. You've got no idea why you're here, really, do you?
Not really, no.
Not really. What it's all about? Just swing that mic round, but on your... We sort of go...
I did have a look yesterday at your... About here?
Yeah, I sort of basically have it nearly on your chest and then talk over the top of it. And you can slide your arm underneath and then you can still talk. That's the idea. Welcome to Characters, a show where, in the dawn of AI, we are trying to better understand the human condition. Season 3 is all about our true colours, stripping away the grey and revealing what haunts, excites us and drives our purpose. I'm Jack, and as your host, I aim to provide our guests with a safe space, aware of potential judgment, to promote vulnerability, empathy and humility. On this show, we aren't focused on who our guest is, what they've achieved or their opinion on society. We've included links in the description for that. We're instead interested in how they overcome anxiety, deal with envy, or embrace forgiveness and gratitude. I really hope you can gain and grow from what our guest has taken a leap and shared for our benefit. To what extent do you feel life is elsewhere?
Elsewhere in what sense?
In whatever sense that comes to you.
So, there's a couple of ways of looking at that question, I guess. And one is on a personal level. We were just sort of briefly having a catch up in a nutshell before we started recording. Life being elsewhere, last year I felt massively overstretched by things. So in terms of my responsibilities and projects that I had going on. So life being elsewhere, I'd want to be with my kids, but then sometimes being with them and you're like, oh, I've got to do this and that and the other, So I'm answering that question in terms of being present. Often I've found that I've had too much on my plate personally and life is elsewhere. It's difficult to be present. Obviously, the other way of looking at that question is to do with aliens, but that's beyond
based on the context,
beyond my knowledge and expertise.
Certainly. But hey, yes, well, I've never actually thought about it like that, but it's very much.
That's why I was sort of like, in what sense? Because
why are we here? Why have you brought me here, Jack?
First question is a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one.
There probably are aliens out. Life is probably elsewhere, somewhere.
But what about in terms of work and you personally? Do you feel like have you ever been chasing something, or have you feel harking after something that you've had, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good angle on that question as well. I like learning new things. So, like, I run a recording studio, as you know, and recently I feel like I've sort of mastered what I do, if you know what I mean. Not to say that I sound engineer or produce music perfectly, but in terms of what I do at my studio with my equipment, I know how it all works. I know how to make great recordings. And then I'm sort of like, well, I kind of want to learn something new. So I studied a law master's, and now I've done that, and I probably don't want to practice law, but who knows. But yeah, I think, learning new things is quite important to me. And I think for any creative person, it probably is true for most creative people, like trying out new things, whether it's new techniques or new equipment.
It all feeds into it, I guess.
It does, yeah, and
not that you're necessarily going to be writing or making songs about law, maybe, but
no.
It's life experience that goes into these creative pieces.
Yeah, I used to write songs because I haven't written a song in a long time. That was kind of my entry pathway into recording music, was to record myself, which I did from the age of 12 or 13. But then I enjoy the variety on offer by working with, through working with other people. And I think actually recording the songs, I enjoy producing music maybe more than I do writing the music, because there's a lot of pressure on you yourself if you're writing music and then you're recording it yourself. It's a lot, And actually, it's good to work with other people, I think, definitely in music, So,
And what do you hope people gain from your work?
just hope people like, if it's my songs, I hope they like them, and obviously. But music's an interesting one because people either get into music because it's an outlet for something. It's not just about, well, for a lot of people, it's a way of expressing themselves, which they can't otherwise, express, things that they can't otherwise express. But yeah, I was thinking about this morning, actually, because what kind of things we would be talking about. Because obviously there's a big part of music, or what prompts somebody to want to write and record and perform music. Like I just said, there's the expressive part of it, where you get quite a lot of shy and introverted people who end up being very successful performers. And that's quite interesting, because it's maybe not in their nature to perform. They might not have necessarily set out on a musical career thinking, I'm going to perform to lots of people.
Or been the most comfortable in that setting,
yeah,
certainly.
But I think every artist wants some kind of recognition. So whether that is they want other people to appreciate their work, everybody's different. So I'm just sort of trying to generalize here. But what I've always said to younger artists or bands who come to the studio, quite often they ask for some advice about, career advice. The most important thing is to write and record music for yourself. So, and this probably applies to other creative art forms as well. I think this is also true of most artists. They probably start doing it for themselves rather than think, I'm gonna go on X Factor and become rich and famous. But I think that obviously is an option. But I think in terms of genuine artists, they're doing it for themselves first, and if what they do resonates with other people, then that's just a magic formula. So what do I want? Yeah, I mean, anything I'm involved in, I just want other people to enjoy it. And music is so personal, and different people like different kinds of music. And I found that pretty much everything has, you call it a market, but a listener. Whatever you make, someone will enjoy listening to it. So
you can't fail in a way. If that's your goal,
I'm sure you can. I'm sure you could fail, but that's not what it's about. It's not about success or failure, really. For a lot of people, it is. But the kind of music I enjoy making it's not. I don't get involved in projects thinking, oh, this is going to make somebody rich and famous. Obviously, I hope it does. But for me, that's not what it's about.
What was the last piece of work that you did for yourself?
Well, I'm in a band called Gypsy Fingers, as you know, and we've kind of paused our third album, so we'll come back to that at some point. But for me, I kind of got a bit swamped last year, so I did revive some very old songs that I wrote probably when I was about 20 or something, as a means of trying to trying to get back into the songwriting aspect of music. But then life just kind of took over again, and sort of that's just, just going with the flow. That's how it is sometimes. Yeah, there's a song that I wrote called Blue Skies, and I'm really, really proud of that song. And sometimes when I'm sort of, you mentioned about life being elsewhere, when I think, oh, I shouldn't neglect my songwriting. I should really work on that because I do really enjoy it. Part of me thinks, well, I have written some good songs, and perhaps one of my faults as a songwriter is that but one of my strengths as a music producer is I'm a perfectionist. So I don't, if I've got a song idea and I don't think that it's kind of going to be as good as I want it to be, then I kind of just don't necessarily finish it. And I think that is a mistake. It's me giving some advice to myself. Not every song that you write will be a hit, like we were just talking about, but that's not the point. And I think it's okay to, it's important to finish things which aren't going to be perfect, and you can't expect everything you do to be amazing, because life's just not like that, and that's way too much pressure. So there's an interesting book by a songwriter I really like called Jeff Tweedy. He's in a band called Wilco. And he's written a book which I've misplaced somewhere. I think it's called How to Write One Song. And he basically gives all these just like little tips on songwriting. But the main thing that or maybe this is because I only read a few pages of it, but one of the things he said early on is try and write a song every day. And he's like, that might sound like a lot, but just try and do it. And if you don't do it, it's fine. But you've got to accept that in order to write an album of 10 great songs, you may have to write 50 to pick those 10, So I need to revisit that book to try and maybe motivate me to write some more songs and to let go of the sort of perfectionist in me. But yeah.
Where do you think that perfectionist streak, where do you get that from, do you think?
I reckon there's a few reasons for it. It's mainly down to personality. So at school, I got a scholarship award to my school, so I'd always done quite well in exams and things like that. Whereas music was not something I studied it at GCSE, but I didn't really study it beyond that. And it's something that music's so different to everybody. People experience it in different ways. And I think part of the reason I really enjoyed it is because you don't have to study it in a textbook or whatever, or on lessons. You can just do whatever you want. There aren't any rules. So the creativity and the freedom of expression, aside from studying maths and history or Latin or whatever, really appealed to me. But nevertheless, I still had quite high expectations of myself. And then, so that's kind of my nature, I suppose. But then there's also an aspect of it, which is that my dad is very successful. And so it's like, that kind of sets a bar for me quite high,
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So maybe that's, I can never really escape that, but I've just got to accept it for what it is. And I think that comes with maturity, as we get older.
And it really does. But like you mentioned about pressure earlier, and for me, like the pressure growing up, it was kind of a subliminal pressure that nobody ever really talked about, but everybody always talked about this person that I never saw, and everybody always ever, it was always ever about Stanley, and then and you don't know what to do with that as a kid growing up, especially if nobody talks to you about it and actually explains what it's all about. So I grew up, and I've said this before on podcasts and elsewhere, I grew up believing that in order to be loved, you had to be fantastic, you had to be unseen, and you had to do it alone. And that was the message that my childhood brain figured out. And it's a daily battle now of pushing that, not pushing it away, but seeing it when it rears its head and going, oh yeah, I know that one, and it's not about that, and I'm doing it for this, this, and this reason. And as you say, it gets easier as you get older, but it is, I mean, bloody hell, it is a real challenge.
Yeah, I can empathise with that completely. And I suppose that's another reason why I sort of steered myself towards producing music and working with other people as well. It's because, when we have released our own music, me and Victoria in Gypsy Fingers, and particularly when they've just been songs which is only me singing on it, obviously, Dad's fans find the music, and a lot of them have been really supportive, but you always get, there are comparisons or questions come up about that. So whereas when I'm producing music in the studio, it's a different thing. And it's also, my dad didn't produce music for other people. And so it's a nice little musical niche and comfort zone for me, where I feel like I'm carving my own path without feeling overshadowed too much, which with the songwriting, the overshadowing thing is always there. And I don't really mind so much about that anymore, actually. But definitely, when I first started out in music, it was like, yeah, you play everything yourself, you record it yourself, and I now realise that actually there's more that you can do it that way. But music, the way I like to play it in a band, is
so much more rewarding.
Yeah, and actually, my dad made some great records with musicians as well, but.
But it's amazing what you latch onto.
Yeah, and I'm sure, there's a whole team behind Stanley who were part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but you don't see that because everybody only ever talks about the person, and you don't understand that there is a whole team behind it because you never see that. Nobody ever explains it to you. I mean, obviously, I'm just preaching my experience now, but it's horrendous struggle and a massive sort of emotional barrier.
But isn't it funny though how you're still drawn to it,
to the field?
Yeah. So I'm drawn to music because I see that's what my dad was doing, and for whatever reason, I loved playing guitar, and then I started writing songs, and I just loved it. But even I know I've got friends from school or from elsewhere who have followed their parents into a particular career. It might not be creative, it might be law, and now they're, I don't know, a patent lawyer or something, because that's what their dad was, or they're a doctor, because it doesn't always happen that way, but it happens a lot. And I think it's because when you're growing up, a lot of people look up to their parents, or that's just what you become familiar with.
Because you're surrounded by it.
Yeah. So my dad made music, so it's only natural that I felt, that's an interesting thing to do, and then I explored it and found it was very interesting, and still is. So
amazing, and that's an ongoing journey, as I fully appreciate, because it really is for me. Every day is different, and some days can be really challenging, and you lose yourself in it, and it's horrendous. In what ways might you be difficult to work with?
Well, I don't think I'm difficult to work with.
Wow,
obviously.
Of course.
I don't know, really. I don't know. It's a difficult one for me to answer, but that obviously makes me sound really arrogant. I'm sure my wife thinks I'm really difficult to work with. So, but that's a different dynamic.
Yeah.
I think that I'm fairly easy to work with because I am quite relaxed, but also I do want, I'm a people pleaser, so I do want people to be happy, like, you know. And so...
When did you discover that about yourself?
I don't know. It's always felt kind of that way, you know. But in the studio...
have you always been able to articulate that you're a people pleaser, as you say?
I've never really had to articulate it, but, you know, in the studio, we'll basically keep working on something until people are happy.
Right.
And I put in a lot of time and effort. You know, I mean, why wouldn't you want people to be happy?
That's certainly. But I mean, more in a sort of personal observation way, so that it becomes, you know, a bit of self-understanding, if you know what I mean. So, you know, because if you constantly, like, I'm absolutely a people pleaser, you know, and floating around wondering whether everybody's happy and being really anxious about it all the time because somebody's making a grimacing face or something that they're not sure about, when you've just added a tambourine to a record or whatever, and you think it's brilliant, and you're waiting for everybody to some example like that. It's really interesting to be able to articulate it for yourself, I found.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, maybe I can be a little bit stubborn. So maybe that is a difficult thing to work with. But actually, spinning a positive on that, if I think something's a really good idea and the band are not really sure, I'll be like, why don't we just try it? And that's a difficult question to say, no, we're not even going to try it, you know. So it's stubbornness in the sense of, like, kind of, you know, because music, I can often hear things in my head, you know, hear like, oh, that would sound great with a tambourine or with an organ or certain backing vocals. But, you know, it's good to be experimental with what you're doing. And if it's okay to make mistakes as well. So sometimes you try something, you go, yeah, actually, you know what, guys, hands up, that's not, you know, that's not worth pursuing then. Yeah.
Tell me about fear of failure.
Fear of failure, yeah. It's not so much a fear of failure, it's just like an unwillingness to fail almost, you know. But sometimes, you know, sometimes things don't work out and you have to accept that. But I mean, I will keep going at something until people are happy, ideally. There's only been a few times where I feel like, you know, the sort of things haven't worked out properly in the studio. And you can always think, oh, what could I have done better? But in the few instances I can think of, I just, you know, ultimately, I remember saying to the band, because this guy just wasn't happy with the record, and I was like, is there anything I can do if there's anything I can do to make it sound better, then tell me what it is, and we'll do it. But, and this is maybe a little bit too brutal, but it's like, but if you don't like the way it's being played, then that's up to you guys, you know. And unfortunately, in that situation, I felt like he had to spell it out, because as a sound engineer, you quite often, you know, it's not sounding good, it must be the sound engineer's fault. That's not always the case. It's usually actually not the case. You know, it can be, obviously. But so much with recording is about the performance and about the instruments as well, and about the people. So, yeah, I try my best not to fail. It probably has happened a few times, but, you know.
And how do you deal with that? How have you dealt with it?
If it was a recording which is just not sounding good, then we'll just probably go back and redo it, you know. But sometimes if it's a matter of opinion, where, you know, I've done a mix and maybe it's the third revision of the mix, for example, we tried different things, and it's like, that's a good mix.
Oh, right.
You know. But then the band are like, no, we still don't like it. And you're like, well, I've kind of tried, you know, we've done everything we can do with it. So maybe you have to re-record it, you know. I think with music, there is always with recording, there's always a way around things. You can never completely fail. With live performance, it's a bit different, you know. Like if we were doing a gig in Poland, and it was suddenly like, oh, let's do this song that Victoria and I wrote together. It's the first song we worked on together, and I just blanked out in the second verse. Like in my head, I couldn't remember the lyrics. So, but you've just got to power through sometimes. You know, a lot of it's to do with confidence. So, you know, we played through the song, and pretty much nobody in the audience had ever heard it before anyway, so they were none the wiser. It doesn't mean that Victoria wasn't like furious with me. So, you know, everybody makes mistakes, and sometimes you can have happy accidents as well, you know.
A lot of that. My experience in the studio, exactly the same, or writing or whatever. You accidentally play something, and then it takes the song in a different direction, or whatever, and that's great fun.
Yeah, exactly. Because you can auto-tune and edit the hell out of everything, and that is great. But the liveness and the randomness of music can sometimes be quite interesting too. So.
Is there anyone you regret losing touch with?
Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of people. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think I've always been a kind of person to sort of just go with the flow, you know. And I think having been to boarding school, I was talking about this with one of my best friends who I you know only probably see him like once or twice a year or something. And I think boarding school is a place where you just sort of get used to everyone being around, you know, which as an adult, I kind of realise, you know, you take all those people for granted. And I do still need to make more of an effort to keep in touch with people, for sure. In terms of specific people, I'm going to take that question as a more of a prompt for me to make more of an effort to keep in touch with friends. Yeah,
it's curious how, you know, because you can, and I certainly have. I don't talk to anybody bar this guy because we went to school together, both schools together, and you just. Yeah, I was so ready to leave school and so ready to go out and rule the world with my music and blah, 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 that I mean, the ego was rampant and blah, blah, blah. And I was just, I was ready to leave all that behind, and that was it. And in hindsight, you kind of go, oh, maybe you're missing something there. I don't know. Or you're certainly leaving something behind that you might not realise that you were. And yeah, there are days and times where I sort of go, oh, quite nice to have a chat with that person, see how they're doing now, or whatever. You know.
Yeah, it's interesting. That sort of tunnel vision of being like, this is what I want to do creatively.
This is all that matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I'm sure you found, as I have, that you've probably drawn other people in as friends.
Certainly.
By doing that, because you know, people doing similar things gravitate towards one another.
It's an interesting to spare a thought on, though.
Definitely.
Certainly.
Yeah, definitely. And then I sometimes wonder as well, and I don't know whether it's different for women and men, but my wife finds it very easy to make new friends, and it's just different for me. But it does make me appreciate that, you know, the people that you kind of grew up with, whether it's you know, just neighbours or whether it's friends from school or university. A lot of my friends are quite, particularly the ones from university, they're doing all sorts of different things, and we probably wouldn't be friends if we met randomly. And we are friends because we had a shared common experience. So yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting which friends you do keep and which sort of just drift away for whatever reason. In fact, actually, I spent a year in Guatemala about 20 years ago, almost, and there was that was a real bubble in my life, and I wish I'd kept in better touch with some of those people, because there were some really interesting people out there who were doing all different things, and that experience led me back to music. So I went to university, and then I spent a year abroad in Guatemala because I studied Spanish and linguistics at uni. And when I was out there, I ended up playing loads of music, as well as obviously speaking Spanish. And I met lots of really interesting people, mostly from the States, but there were quite a few Europeans as well, and as well as Guatemalans. And a lot of them were just doing really interesting things, which were a bit more outside the box compared to kind of what was expected of you, growing up in England and going to school. And that just made me think, you can do what you want, These people are like, this guy's got his own mezcal brand, which it's called Illegal Mezcal, illegal mezcal. And they would do like bootleg runs, smuggling it across the border from Mexico to Guatemala. And now it's a brand that you can buy in restaurants in London, And so, but at that time, they were just selling it in the bar in Guatemala. And so, that was kind of a real kind of key point in my life where I felt it was like a sliding doors moment where it's like, no, you can do music. Look, you've got all these people doing really interesting things, writing books or setting up schools for underprivileged children in Guatemala. So, what do you want to do? And for some reason, it's always been about music for me. And then I realised, I've got this recording studio at home, which hadn't been used for a long time. There was an opportunity there for me to do what I'd always wanted to do. And actually, I remember, and I wish I could find it, I remember putting up an advert. Well, I must have been about 14 or something, in our local shop and local newsagents, advertising a recording studio. And I don't think anyone called to book, but that's just made me think, like, that's how long ago I wanted to run a recording studio. And that's what I'm doing now. So, yeah.
And you've had to have that big, did you have to pause for all these years that the motorway thing's been going on, or the train line thing's been going on, or
the studio? The studio is near HS2, the railway line. So we have had to stop for a bit, but we're
on the other side of that.
Negotiations about what to do about it.
Oh, right. So okay. Well, here's hoping that is over long before anybody can. Oh yes, horrendous. What makes you envious?
What makes me envious? I used to get envious of people who are like really, really successful, and I thought, well, what we're doing is better than that, or whatever. I'm not so much anymore, because I'm not really after like fame and glory. I don't get too envious of people anymore. I'm not sure it's really envy, but there's quite a few bands I've worked with who I'm like, why aren't they more successful? It's not. I'm sort of like envious on their behalf, I guess. I don't see myself as a very envious person, thankfully.
Supportive, certainly, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, I do like to think I'm supportive. Hope so.
I mean, envy's a funny thing, but I mean, do you think there's anything to learn from it?
Well, with anything like, any emotion like envy, which is it's obviously quite negative, acknowledging it is a good thing. Because you're like, well, why is that there? And then do a little bit of digging to see where that comes from, I guess. I could probably get envious of somebody who's had success or something like that, but the way that they've gone about it has been deceitful. I think that's maybe slightly different. It feels like a kind of envy, but there's a difference, which is to do with justice. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you kind of cheated somehow. You know what I mean? So I think I like to, in a perfect world, people would benefit from out of merit, But it's not always like that.
No.
But yeah, I think with negative emotions, there's always a learning opportunity. A therapist would probably say.
Yeah, yes, certainly. Always, but painful and challenging and difficult to get through and need support with.
Yeah.
And all of the things that this is kind of really all about. This podcast, I think every time I sit somebody down and we do this, I'm kind of thinking, what's this about? What's this about for me? What's this about for you? What's this about for the audience? And every day is different. Every person is kind of different, and that's part of the beauty of it. Is that we can put this out into the world, whatever this is, and it will be criticised and judged and thought about. But somebody, and I think there'll be plenty of people who you never even hear. They're just one view on the video, that they take something that you've said and they go, that's it. That's the answer to the thing that I've been struggling with, that I haven't been able to articulate. And now I can bring that into my life and I can move forward and make different decisions and, for all intents and purposes, change my life going forward. If there is any, movement in this, then it is, that's it. Has certainly the potential of doing that, but otherwise, we've got, just like you have your studio, it's like, well, we have it here, we have all the stuff, we have the capacity to do it, we have the time, we can forget about money, because it's not about money, and just enjoy being human for an hour.
Yeah.
In all of the different shapes and sizes that, and feelings and difficulties and challenges and barriers that come in the way. Because we're all more alike than we realise. And I think you're, so we've done, how many have we done? 12, 22. So I think you're probably about 30. You're 30th person to come on this show. And I ask near enough the same questions. And the similarities in answers are crazy.
Do you find people are a bit guarded? Because I was just thinking about one of the questions you asked earlier, either what people should know about me or my difficulty.
What do you wish people understood about you?
Yeah, and I'm just talking, as we have been, I realise I'm a bit guarded. You ask me certain questions, and I sort of, yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
No, not really.
But that's,
No, it's in the sense of like, I can picture certain things or events in my head, like if it, friends you wish you kept in touch with, I sort of don't really want to reveal too much. So,
and that's absolutely fine. And the beauty is that it is, as I said at the beginning, it's really up to you. And so, because one thing that is probably very clear is I have a habit of oversharing, which can be just as, frustrating, annoying, self-involved, or whatever you want to call it, as perhaps somebody having the same thing about being guarded. So it's kind of irrelevant, and that's kind of the beauty of it, I think. But as with all things sort of creative stuff, well, maybe it's worth trying. So here we are. I'll throw another horrendous question at you.
Okay, hit me.
Describe an important teacher in your life outside of school.
Well, I have a meditation teacher who's called Bergs, and if I were to, a meditation teacher, that's probably a description enough, but he's taught me a lot in a very short period of time. I did a 1 week long intensive silent meditation retreat in 2015, so 10 years ago. And that was another turning point for me in my life. It was really life-changing. So, yeah, and I learned a lot just of life stuff that they don't teach you at school, and a lot of energetic and spiritual stuff that, again, nobody teaches at school either,
How's it helped you?
What's that?
How's it helped you?
Energetically, I shifted a big weight or a big blockage, and I just felt like a completely new person. It felt like a shadow and a massive weight had lifted. It just was just mind-blowing. And I feel very fortunate to have had that experience. And so some of these things like envy or, a lot of these issues that I may have had, which I feel like I have grown out of or am still in the process of doing so, that 1 week alone was just completely pivotal. So, I owe a lot to him. And they're called The Art of Meditation, and he's called Bergs, and he's just amazing. So,
Amazing. Tell just a little bit just about appreciating him. Just tell me a bit about gratitude and sort of, your relationship to gratitude.
Yeah, gratitude's a tricky one. It's really important, obviously, to be grateful for things. And I am very grateful for everything I have. And I'm sure that's the same for most people. But obviously, you can still feel, things can still get you down, or you got stresses of daily life, or, But it's important I find it important to just be grateful in my heart for the things that I have, because overall, I'm super grateful for everything. There's also, a school of thought which is about, you can either think of it as manifesting or, what you want, or as magnetism or something like that. And I think the way I see it is that I try and remind myself to be positive about things. Like, what's a positive reaction to this? Even if it's somebody just being really horrible to you. What's the best positive reaction I can display? Or in a similar way, if I'm feeling really down about something or something really awful's happened, you just remind yourself of like all the things I'm grateful of. Because I think that resonance of gratitude and positivity, hopefully it will, echo back on you somehow, And that's not to say that you should just go around pretending to be grateful and positive to try and get it back. But again, as I said earlier, it's like, why wouldn't you want other people to be happy? So why wouldn't you want to be positive, and why wouldn't you want to be grateful for things? I'm not saying that I always am. Like, obviously, I've
you
have arguments with
you're gonna have to
people.
Teach me how if
I'm not. But that's what I sometimes it's like a little switch in my head, and I'm like, okay, just try and flick the switch, snap out of it, kind of thing. Easier said than done. Massively. But yeah, I think being grateful for what you have maybe means you appreciate it more as well. But there is. I don't know about you with studio stuff, but I haven't been lusting after new equipment for quite a while because I've got all the bits and pieces that I need. Obviously, there's loads of gear that I'd love to have, but I kind of stopped doing that as well. Just really appreciate what I have. It's very important, but it's very difficult. I find it difficult as well when sometimes you get there's situations where you can get the sense that somebody is expecting you to be grateful for something that you're not really grateful for. That's really, I'm not talking about like rubbish Christmas presents or anything like that. That's a tricky one.
I know what you mean. Very curious. Very curious. It's
a good question.
It's fantastic. That's the idea. They're not mine, but they are brilliant. And it just sparks the best kind of conversations that don't include too much small talk. Getting to the crux of things and what it's all really about. And I think that's what. When you're creating and you're trying to create, we've had photographers on, we've had all sorts of creators and artists and people who are business people, but also paint and, all sorts of different kinds of people. And again, it just comes back to these core ideas and core struggles that we all face. And in various guises, we've found ways round them without trying to reveal them to anybody and built walls and and it's if anything it's very interesting. It's very interesting, but it's also if we do more about putting that empathy into the world of going, look, you're not the only one struggling with this. It is horrendous. And I suffer with it in this way, and I suffer with it in that way, and I think, I guess there's, the kind of, want to change the world version of me, sort of wants to push that out into the world.
Sure. Just going back to the people pleaser thing, just had a thought, which is that sometimes I find myself doing what people want in musically. This is, so like on a mix or something, I'll do a mix, get the brief kind of thing. And then with mixing, I kind of just do what I think sounds good, which I think they will think sounds good, like a kind of a meeting point.
Because why wouldn't they?
yeah. And then you do it and you're like, okay. And then it's like all this feedback comes back. And it depends on how experienced they are. But sometimes you get all this feedback and you're like, really? Anyway, okay, I'm going to do that. But then you find that, oh no, that's not actually, they preferred the previous mix. And you're just like, that can be a little bit frustrating. But maybe the lesson there is to be, sometimes, like I was saying before, you don't know if something, there's no harm in trying things. But sometimes if I feel that something's going to be a waste of time, I should probably put my foot down a bit more. And there's a friend of mine who does put his foot down, maybe I feel like a bit too much, but that's just his personality. But also saves him a lot of time. If he's like, no, we're not doing that. That's a stupid idea.
Do you have a revision policy?
Not really, no. It's just about reasonableness. But there was one time where I had to do probably like
countless
30 or maybe even 50. They were the tiniest revisions, and it gets to the point where like I can't even tell the difference yet. It's like, but that was, But again,
challenging.
being a people pleaser can take a lot of time and energy, can't it? So,
And time and energy that isn't spent on how you'd like to spend it necessarily, because you're fiddling about with all that stuff.
yeah, you're like, oh, okay, I'll turn up the reverb by 0.1% or something. Like, okay. But anyway, as long as you get there in the end, it's fine.
Yeah. Oh. Wow. I remember it well when I was running the studio. It was always, I had a lot of proud parents' kids. And isn't he wonderful? And, yeah. So it was a lot of that. And you'd sort of be listening to the recording and going, yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And that's bringing joy to people. But in my 20s, when you're in it to make epic records that everybody loves because you're going to take over the world with your music, blah, 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 I just wasn't into it. But actually, in hindsight, I'm only just really thinking about this now, to be honest. It's a lovely thing to do for a family.
Yeah, and it's a great experience for the, if they're children or teenagers as well. It's a really good experience, and it can lead on to other things, Yeah. Everyone's got to start somewhere. I mean,
absolutely.
Do you
absolutely.
Remember, do you remember the first song you wrote?
Quite. And I still, as I'm sure you do as well, you have an archive on a drive somewhere. I've got it all stashed away, and nobody will ever hear it. But those moments happen where you do hit play, and you do go, wow. And music has a wonderful way of bringing you back to a moment.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the best things about music is whatever you were listening to at that time, you can hit play and you're there again. That's one of its most powerful things for me. I've been listening to a lot of ambient music because I haven't really had space for anything else. Busy as it is, and so I just sort of adopted this ambient music genre. But my brother, Christmas Eve, he came and we had a drink, and he started playing all the old Christian American rock records that we used to listen to in our teens. His slightly earlier and mine slightly
like Creed.
Exactly. Creed and Silverchair and
Nickelback
and Tool and like it's more proggy stuff, but and then what was another one? Anyway, so and it just opened this, and now that's all I can listen to.
Yeah,
like I'm back on this massive wave of it, and it's just bringing me back to that time, and I feel wonderful.
It was really funny. Like we used to listen to XFM or Radio X when we were at school, so you'd have like all that kind of music you just described, and like Foo Fighters, Nirvana, Queens of the Stone Age, all of that sort of stuff. And I hadn't listened to it in ages, and then I was just in the car, and I was like, "Oh, Radio X," and I put it on, and it was like The Killers, Mr. Brightside, and you're like, it took me back 20 years ago or something. And then the playlist that they had was pretty much exactly the same as it was when I was at school. Apart from they'd added a few Arctic Monkeys tracks and Jake Bugg or something like that, But it's kind of funny. But yeah, it takes you back, doesn't it? You hear a song and you're like, oh, I remember.
Incredibly powerful. That and the occasional smell, is kind of like, oh. But it's less, I don't know. I always use this very, very spoilt example of the smell of new carpet reminds me of my childhood bedroom because my parents got a new carpet put into my bedroom and I grew up in that room, and therefore whenever I smell that, I'm 6.
Interesting.
There you go, Ben, have that one.
We've got my grandparents' old toaster. And I just sort of dug it out and started using it. And that smell, which I think it needs like a clean or something, but the smell of that toaster making toast takes me back to their house.
Yeah.
It's
wonderful. It's wonderful and fascinating. I love it. what are the best things that you owe to your parents?
Probably different things to both, but I'm going to say memories. You know, I think that as a dad now, I'm conscious of, like, with my children, that there's certain things that at this, you know, at a young age that they'll always remember. And that's the same with my parents, you know. I didn't grow up with my dad. My parents separated when I was young, but I still got some, you know, really beautiful memories of spending time with him as a kid, or him reading me a bedtime story, things like that, you know. And those are the things I'll always cherish. There's also, he gave me a 1963 Fender Precision bass as well. So that was pretty.
I love that. It's like, oh yeah. It's supposed to be really all blah blah. No, he gave me a bass.
Just kidding, but that bass is really good.
Of course. But also, the times are one thing, and the memories, absolutely. The stuff is brilliant, but also, like, your musical, like, would you be doing music? You know, your entire lifestyle and all of that.
Yeah, that question, because I didn't grow up with both my parents together, that kind of, it's like there's two different people who did two different things in my childhood. So that's a bit more of a tricky one. But what I'm trying to say is, you know, I love them both. My mum looked after me as a kid and did, you know, a lot more, like the vast majority of the parenting and all of that sort of stuff. So, you know, if not wanting to have to choose between parents, but it would be
sure.
And also that's another question, another thing which often comes up. People always assume, oh, you what was it like growing up with a dad who did music? And you're like, well, actually, I owe a lot more to my mum, you know, but nobody knows
because he wasn't around
who my mum is. So
he wasn't around. He was doing
he was making music, touring, and, you know,
doing the rock star thing.
Yeah, exactly. So so memories to both of them. The bass from my dad was
cheers, Dad. Cheers.
And then mum, just so much.
Of course.
So much to my mum. Can't even begin to start, you know, to pick a thing.
No, certainly. Do you feel you live an ordinary or an extraordinary life?
I feel like I live an ordinary life in many senses. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm not like super rich, and I don't have loads of fancy stuff, but I'm conscious of the fact I'm very, very fortunate for the things that I do have. So yeah, I think I'm quite an ordinary guy, but I've had, I've for all intents and purposes inherited a recording studio, which I have revived, and that's what I do, and I'm doing my dream job, and I feel really fortunate for that. So yeah, and then there's part of me also which is, even if I was living an extraordinary life, I would probably be too modest or shy to admit it, you know. So, but yeah, no, I think we live a fairly ordinary life, but I'm really lucky that my job and the opportunities that has opened up for me. So,
I think in my time I've desperately, I feel live an extraordinary life. I feel, I mean, I've had a massive struggle with loneliness and not being able to, because also being the product of inheritance and having this space to work with and having a leg up, as people would call it, or you're certainly afraid of people calling it, that you're not built off your own 2 feet and all that stuff. Is just this horrendous idea that is really isolating, because it's not that simple, and it's so easy to be, I've found, to put myself in that box almost, because really there aren't too many people who have directly said, "Oh, you're just this, that, and the other." But I'm still, again, so conscious of it, and I think it's based on gratitude, and you've got to be humble, and you can't, and isolating.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's particularly when you're trying to do it all yourself, I think.
That's it, because it's not cool to talk about it, and it's not, and it's kind of I don't know. There's a
It's funny, like,
there's a shadow over it.
Yeah. No, my wife. I remember. You've just reminded me of a conversation we had maybe 6 months ago. So, I don't have any friends or something. I was like, "But you've got way more friends than me." She's like, "Well, you've got all the friends in the studio." I'm like, "Well, they are." I mean, most of the people I work with, we do end up becoming friends. But I'm like, "Well, that is work." She goes, "Well, you really enjoy your work." I'm like, "Yeah, well, sorry, So, yeah. It's funny. So she's definitely got more friends than me, but I've got like more musician
Colleagues.
friends. Well, I couldn't even call them colleagues, because the thing is,
I mean, they're clients.
They're clients, but they are also friends.
Yeah.
So most of them. So it can be kind of isolating, but with my studio, I'm very fortunate that people do come, and then we work together, and they, but yeah, a lot of them we don't really. I might go to gigs and things like that, but
there's nothing like somebody shouting at you in your ear, though. Love that.
Yeah, that was.
Let's go to the loudest place in the world to have a conversation. I've never understood it.
Yeah, that's true.
Look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. How was it? All right?
It was great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great.
Good to chat.
Real pleasure. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you for watching Characters. I hope you were able to gain and grow from our guests' vulnerability. To discover more characters, please subscribe to support the show and allow us to share more of our true colours. Here's the latest episode, or one YouTube has picked for you. Enjoy.